All right, it is 7 o'clock. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we?
You bet.
All right, so thank you to everybody for joining us literally from across the world. We appreciate having you all here. Thank you, Duane, for doing this series with the Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum. We want to let everybody know that we appreciate donations to not only support this program, but also the Duane Vandenbusche Education Scholarship for a local student to help them out with going to college. The way that you can make a donation is by going to crestedbutte.com and making a donation there. You can also, of course, send a check to P.O. Box 2480, Crested Butte, Colorado, 81224, if you prefer the old school way, like many of us do. Just a reminder that this is being recorded. You can, if you miss it or for some reason your internet goes out or you want to share with friends, you can find a recording of this video at crestedbuttemuseum.com. It's on the homepage of our website. Just scroll down a little bit and go to the right-hand column. We also have set up a YouTube channel on YouTube. And so we've loaded lots of different videos from Red Lady Films and Natan Bilo Photography, as well as some other small videos that we've made through the years. And we're going to keep adding to it, so be sure to check that out while you're rewatching Duane's series as well. Please become a member to support programming like this. Members are the first ones to know all about programming. You also get 10% off in our store. You're also added to our newsletter. You also get discounts for all of our events and our walking tours. Sign up for our newsletter to get news all about what we're doing. And be sure to check out our Facebook and Instagram pages, which we like to post lots of historic photos from our collections there. We do have walking tours coming up every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m. and every Saturday at 3 p.m. We have historic walking tours that go through town. We also have themed walking tours this Saturday at 10 a.m. We've got Russ Lawyer leading a railroad history walking tour through town. He'll be holding another one on August 25th. So if you miss this Saturday's, it will be available again later this August. So be sure to sign up for any of those walking tours to build on the history that you learned here. We're trying something new tonight. We're adding closed captioning to our PowerPoint. So it won't be running while we talk here at the beginning or at the questions at the end, but it will be running during the PowerPoint. So if we move a little slow and there's some hiccups, that's why. We're trying a new thing to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about. And so closed captioning will be started tonight. Finally, we're doing a couple of trivia questions tonight with some amazing prizes, including a prize to the film festival. It's worth $240. It's a pass to the virtual film festival that's happening at the end of September 25th through the beginning of August. What's really cool is there are two films that are making their premiere at that both are all about Crested Butte history. And both of them include photos not only from the museum collection, but also from Duane Vandenbusche's collection. The first one is by Red Lady Films called High Country. It's all about the mid-timers. So we're talking about the guys that showed up in the 60s and the 70s and created the town that we know today. It's a fantastic film. I've seen it. Guys, I'm gonna go watch it again. Don't miss it. The second one is Born from Junk by the Buttery Agency, and it's all about Crested Butte mountain biking. And this director and these videographers are not afraid to have fun with it. So again, not something to miss. Definitely worth, if you don't win the film festival prize tonight, it's definitely worth going to the film festival website and buying some tickets. And then Duane, I'll let you tell them about the other prize.
Yeah, the other prize, Nell, is going to be a copy of the big book that I did called the Gunnison Country. I'll put it up here. It was done in 1980, and it's a kind of a complete history of the Gunnison Country. Are we ready for the two trivia questions, Nell?
We are, and just so everybody knows, the way to win is that you have to post in the chat to all panelists and attendees. So don't post in the Q&A, don't accidentally post to just the panelists. the first one to post to all panelists and attendees will be able to win these prizes. And Duane's got 2 questions, so you got 2 chances to win.
All right, here's question number 1, and this is the Crested Butte Film Festival one. There have been a number of Olympic athletes, 4 in track and field, and 19 in skiing from Western State who are Olympic athletes who competed in the Olympic Games. I want 5 of them. Whoever gets 5 Olympic athletes from Western State wins the tickets to the Crested Butte Film Festival. And the second trivia question that will involve my book on the Gunnison Country is, there's a backcountry road in the Gunnison Country where 12 people died in 2 separate accidents in 1971 within 3 months of each other. I want to know the name of that road. So there are the 2 trivia questions.
Would you repeat those both one more time?
Yep, I want 5 Olympic athletes from Western State who competed in the Olympic Games. That's question number 1. And question number 2 is, I want to know the name of the road where 12 people died in 2 separate accidents in 1971.
Ooh, it looks like we may already have a winner for the road question.
Well, Schofield Pass is not the answer. So if they got Schofield Pass, that's not the answer.
We've got Mike Burns, who has guessed Crystal Canyon.
That's it. Mike's got it. Mike, if you got my book, give it up to somebody else.
The next one to win is David Dolfinger. Oh no, he's got Cramner Road. Cramner Road is not correct.
No.
So the next one is Jerry Musket with Crystal Canyon.
Okay. So Jerry, I think Mike has got the book. So Jeremy, hang on. We'll get your. I know who Jeremy is, but we'll get his address after we're done here. So.
Okay.
Oh, Mike, you don't have it.
Oh, he doesn't.
Mike doesn't have it, so he's going to get it.
All right. Sorry, Jeremy.
I got his address.
Okay. All right. So that means we've got. Let's see. We've got 1, 2. Kaja Lindgren, who's got a few names there.
Okay, what are they?
Loris Werner, John Burrett, Mac Miller, Tiger Demers, and Dick Mize.
That's not, I mean, they're all great skiers, but I don't think they all were in the Olympics, Kaja, but that's close.
Okay. All right, guys. So we'll come back to that question at the end once we can wrap this all up.
Okay, thanks, Nell. I want to go ahead and get started. Next week, we're going to talk about Lake City and the towns around Lake City, which was a great silver gold camp in the middle 1870s. So we're going to work our way up to Engineer Pass and drop down to Animas Forks and Silverton, and then work our way over Cinnamon Pass and do the same thing. And we'll have 2 great prizes next week for the Lake City presentation. But tonight, we are talking about the Gunnison Country and the town of Gunnison. So I'll start off by saying that the Gunnison Country is one of 5 different regions which makes up Colorado's western slope. Northwestern Colorado, up around Craig and Steamboat, southwestern Colorado, down around Durango, the Uncompahgre Country, Montrose, Grand Junction, Delta, and then what I call the Colorado River Country, highlighted by the headwaters of the Colorado River, and that would be up around Middle Park and Grand Lake area, that region. The boundaries of the Gunnison Country are Monarch Pass, 42 miles to the east, Cimarron, 45 miles to the west, Lake City, 55 miles to the south, and Marble, 50 miles to the north. Gunnison County is the 6th largest county in Colorado out of the 64 counties. 3,300 square miles, population of about 17,000 people. The town of Gunnison is about 6,000 people, and it's got a national reputation as being one of the cold spots in the nation. In 1961, nearby Taylor Park had an official recording of 61 degrees below zero. We kept that title for 24 years until Maybelle up around the Yampa River in northwestern Colorado, beat it by 1 degree in 1985 with a chilly 62 degrees below zero. However, anybody living in the Gunnison Country knows with very little humidity, perpetual sunshine, and very little wind for much of the year, the climate is pretty sensational. Gunnison's reputation as a town with a lot of sunshine was shown when the La Vida Hotel promised a free meal to anybody staying at the hotel on a day when the sun didn't shine at all. From 1909 to 1934, a 25-year period, the La Vida Hotel paid off 9 times in 25 years. The Ute Indians, who numbered about 2,500 people on the western slope of Colorado, were the original inhabitants of the Gunnison Country. And there you can see some of their teepees out by the Los Pinos Indian Reservation. Nearly 1,000 of them lived here during the summer, and they left for the Uncompahgre Valley in the winter. By virtue of a treaty of 1868, 2 reservations were established. One was for the northern Ute Indians up around the White River Agency near where Meeker is today, and the other one for the Uncompahgre Utes was the Los Pinos Agency. The word Los Pinos means the pines in Spanish, and that was located about 30 miles from present-day Gunnison and not far from Cottonwood Pass. To provide the Indians with beef, the Gunnison Cow Camp was established with headquarters at Dos Rios, which means meeting of 2 rivers, the Gunnison and the Tamichi, right where the Dos Rios Golf Course is today and exactly on the 13th green. The cow camp began in 1868. 4 years later, in 1872, Alonzo Hartman arrived on horseback in a driving blizzard to take over. Sidney Jocknick, a cook at the cow camp, told about the happenings there in a great book called Early Days on the Western Slope of Colorado. The Ute Indians were moved out of the agency to Kelowna, about 12 miles south of present-day Montrose on the banks of the Uncompahgre River in 1875, as miners and ranchers began to move into the Gunnison Country. From there, they were moved out to Utah in 1881, moved out of Colorado for good. The Spanish were another group of people who were in the Gunnison Country very early. They were looking for gold. They were trying to convert Indians. And they were also looking for a good road to California to tie their mission stations in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco to their mission stations in Santa Fe and Taos in New Mexico. The original name of the Gunnison River is Rio de la San Xavier. Names carved on trees, rusting mining tools, and early names are proof of the Spanish mark on the Gunnison Country. Spain never established a permanent settlement here because they didn't find any gold, because of the cold weather and the difficult Indians, and because they were too far away from their supply lines. However, Spain left us their Catholic religion, their architecture, and their language. Mountain Men were the next people to come through the Gunnison Country. 2 great movies made about them, Jeremiah Johnson and one called The Revenant. It just came out here about the last year or 2. They were trapping beaver for the pelts, which brought $7 each. And they were in the Gunnison Country from the 1780s to 1842. Ezekiel Williams was one of those mountain men who trapped here. But when he went back to Missouri in 1821, he was quoted in the Missouri Gazette newspaper as saying the Gunnison Country wasn't that good for trapping because, quote, the rivers was froze up too much of the year. In other words, a short season. The mountain men were loners. There are about 600 of them total in the Rocky Mountains. They were in 13 areas called holes or valleys in the mountains. We got names for them today. Jackson's Hole, Wyoming, Brown's Hole, Colorado, Ogden's Hole in Utah were 3 of the 13. In 1842, the mountain man era, fur trading era in the West came to an end. overtrapping. A guy named Beau Brummel in England had invented the silk hat, driving beaver hat prices down to $7 a pelt to $1 a pelt. And on top of that, the Indians had become very dangerous. Explorers were the next people into the Gunnison country, highlighted by one Lieutenant John Gunnison, 31 years old, Goshen, New Hampshire. He led 66 men into this area in 1853, looking for a transcontinental railroad route. Today, the town of Gunnison, the Gunnison River, Mount Gunnison, and Gunnison County are all named for him. John Gunnison left St. Louis, went over Levita Pass, then Cochito Pass, and then he passed through where Gunnison is today in September of 1853, en route to Utah. He would be killed by Paiute Indians near Cedar City, Utah in 1853. And when E.G. Beckwith wrote up his report the following year in 1854, the Gunnison country was not considered for a transcontinental railroad because of the deep canyons and the high passes and the heavy snow and the cold weather. The next group of people who came into the Gunnison country were placer miners, and they came into this mysterious area that nobody knew very much about. And the day of the individual miner was here. And with gold pans, they panned out what we call free gold. Didn't need any smelting. Shot, wire, grain, flour, dust, and nugget. Put it in your saddlebags and ride away. Minersville, located at the head of Washington Gulch, 1861, had 250 miners up there placer mining. And they were visited by the great Methodist missionary, John Franklin Dyer. Dyer would write about this in a great book called The Snowshoe Itinerant. Jim Taylor had a company in Taylor Park, 1861. Fred Lottis in adjoining Union Park, 1861. Snowblind Gulch up in the headwaters of the Tamichi. Armstrong Gulch around Pitkin. Collectively, in the 1860s, there were about 500 placer miners in the Gunnison country, taking out between $3 and $6 million worth of gold at $20 an ounce. To give you an idea what that would be worth today, gold is now closing in on $2,000 an ounce on the New York Stock Exchange. So times that by 100, $3 to $6 million by 100. By the 1870s, the streams had been panned out. The Indians had become very dangerous, and that era came to an end. When the Civil War came to an end in 1865, nothing was known about the American West, despite guys like Lewis and Clark and Zebulon Pike and Stephen Long and the railroad surveys of Gunnison, because all these guys had been through the area, maybe spent one day, and they kept on moving. So they really didn't know a whole lot about the area. Wild stories existed in the American West. 100-foot water, hot water, shooting up into the air. Everybody knew that had to be a lie. Indians living in the walls of canyons. Everybody knew that was untrue. And a wild river running through a tremendous canyon and running to God knows where. And everybody knew that had to be a lie. And now the government financed 4 great survey teams from 1867 to 79 to conduct the first scientific survey of the American West. One of them was the great John Wesley Powell. He and his men, first men to go down the Colorado River, 1869, through that fantastic canyon. Clarence Rivers King was another. He exposed the diamond hoax in northwestern Colorado. A third man was Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden, who came into the Gunnison country. Hayden was going to be a medical doctor, but he liked the outdoors and he liked geology. And in the 1850s, he was out on Sioux Indian land in South Dakota with a burlap bag picking up rocks. And the Indians accosted him and they were going to kill him because he was trespassing on their land. but they looked in the burlap bag and they saw rocks. And here was a guy in 100-degree temperatures picking up rocks. And the Indian religion believed that if you ran into a guy who was crazy, you better treat him with respect. And it was pretty obvious that Ferdinand Vandenbusche was crazy. So the Sioux Indians gave him the nickname of man who picks up rocks or running. And he was always welcome on Sioux land from that time on. He came to where Crested Butte was or is today in 1874. And one of his men was a guy named Sam Emmons. And today Mount Emmons and Red Lady Basin right above Crested Butte at 12,300 feet are named for Sam Emmons. He also was the guy who stood on top of Mount Teocalli and looked out and saw Gothic Peak and Crested Butte Mountain and named them the Crested Buttes. Later on, they thought that Gothic more resembled a Gothic cathedral, so the name Gothic Peak, and they dropped the S off of the buttes, and that's how Crested Butte got its name. One of his photographers was the great William H. Jackson, who took a lot of photographs around this area, and also was the first guy to photograph the Mount of the Holy Cross and some of Mesa Verde. The fourth expedition out here was George Wheeler's, and one of his men was a man named William Marshall. And William Marshall was in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1874 when he had an abscessed tooth. And he was trying desperately to get to the nearest dentist in Denver. And he was trying to get a shortcut. And he remembered a low depression in the mountains that he had been on not too long before. And he made his way for that depression. And he found it. And even though he had an abscessed tooth, he took barometric readings. And then he got to Denver about 3 days earlier than he would have by the usual route from Santa Fe. Today, that pass is named for him, Marshall Pass, between Poncha Springs and Sargent's, used by the Rio Grande Railroad to come into the Gunnison Country. Those expeditions opened up the Gunnison Country a little bit. In 1873, a guy named Sylvester Richardson was part of the John Parsons Geological Survey. When the Parsons Survey went home in 1873, Richardson stayed and he walked 500 miles during the fall, found the marble deposits on White House Mountain near today's Marble, found the coal deposits around Crested Butte. But most interestingly, he was infatuated with the great valleys and rivers running through them, and he envisioned great farmland. The following May in 1874, Sylvester Richardson led 20 men into this area, and he had started the Gunnison Colony. He, Sylvester Richardson, and Alonzo Hartman of the Cow Camp are considered today to be the two fathers of the Gunnison Country. And then everything kind of hit the wall, because starting in 1874, tremendous mines began to open up in the San Juan at Telluride and Ouray and Lake City and Silverton. And pretty soon, 25 to 40,000 people came into the Gunnison Country, which looked like it was going to be another Leadville. Rich silver camps opened up. White Pine, Tin Cup, Gothic, Irwin, Pitkin. 2 railroads came in, the South Park and the Rio Grande. Rich investors came in, and smelters came in. And ranches began to open up. And these ranchers made a lot of money by supplying the nearby silver camps with fresh beef. And there you got a good look at Gunnison on Main Street in 1881. And you can see the Vienna Bakery, and you can see the Pearl Baths, and you can see, if you look, one of the wells right down on Main Street. They had 5 wells in Gunnison in the early years. Gunnison had become the place to be. It became the hub of the wheel, the smelter town, the railroad town, the supply town for all the new mining camps opening up. And there's a photo of Gunnison taken from the top of the La Vida Hotel looking out to the west. And this one is around 1884. From hundreds of tents first, buildings began to appear. An early traveler, a guy named George Ingram in 1880 declared, and I'm quoting, "The long rows of tents and the bright campfires along the east bank of the Gunnison River made a spectacular panorama during the summer nights of 1880, and the continuous braying of hundreds of burros disturbed the peace of sleepers all through the night." The famous La Vida Hotel, 4 stories high, $212,000, built in 1884 on South Boulevard. Visitors referred to it as a peacock among mud hens. It had Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, gold lace, antique and mahogany. Gunnison also built a $200,000 gas and water works, unique on the western slope. The city soon had 7 hotels, 4 newspapers, 2 banks, 3 schools. A Philadelphia visitor said, and I quote, "The stories of the changes in the Gunnison country rival the tales of the Arabian Nights." From barren sagebrush, Gunnison had become the city of the future, and many said it would become the capital of Colorado. On the corner of Main and Tamichi, a man named Charlie Stevens put up a shack and started a meat market. And he said customers would line up 50 to 100, waiting their turn to buy beef in the morning, keeping the meat cutters busy. Sam Gill was entrusted, a young banker, entrusted with $30,000 of cash in a safe. And he made his way to Alamosa by rail. And when he got to Alamosa, he found that so much freight was going to Gunnison that he couldn't get a ride on a mule wagon. So he bought himself some coveralls, sprinkled them with a little dirt, hung around for a week, got to know the freighters, and after a week, he got a ride on a mule wagon, providing he would buy all the liquor and tobacco, do all the cooking, and take care of the mules at night. 14 days later, Sam Gill arrived in Gunnison with nobody any wiser that there was $30,000 in the safe. They just thought it was the safe. And everybody was stunned when Gill got off that stage in Gunnison to find out who he was. Another very interesting individual early was a man named Jack Haverly. Jack Haverly was a minstrel king of the United States, grossing $10,000 a week. He had 4 or 5 troops. He bought land east of Gunnison. He bought 1,500 lots in Irwin, Crested Butte, and Gunnison. He invested in silver mines and coal land, and he invested $250,000 in mines in the area. He walked into a poker game in Irwin at its peak, and he said, "What's the limit?" One of the guys sized him up as a dude and said, "The sky." Haverly began to peel $20 bills off a bankroll, and the guy looked at him and he said, "I meant our local sky. It's only $20 high here." Haverly eventually would lose everything in the Gunnison country, and his minstrel troupe kind of faded, and he died a poor man in 1901. Nicholas Babcock became editor of the News Democrat in 1881. He came to Gunnison, as he said, dreaming of an easy life of a country editor, but he said, "I woke up in a hotter, livelier section than any of the old Bowery had ever seen in New York." One of the guys he wrote about was a man named Ike Buzzard. Ike Buzzard had forced the Crested Butte postmaster to stand holding letters while he shot holes through them. Ike Buzzard walked into the News Democrat after that article appeared and walked up to Nick Babcock and he said, "You the fella that wrote this article?" And Nicholas Babcock was so stunned he could hardly say anything, but he said, "Yeah." And Buzzard said, "You appear to be writing a fine sheet around here. How much does it cost to subscribe for a year?" Leaving Babcock badly shaken. Gunnison seemed to have it all, and there you are looking on West Main Street on the west side. Meat market, bakery, and the Gunnison Brewery, all on Main Street in the 1880s. Gunnison seemed to have it all. 2 railroads, 3 smelters, the Moffett smelter on top of Cupelo Hill and back of present-day Western State, the Tamichi Valley smelter near today's airport, and the Lawrence and Shaw smelter just north of town that still has a big red chimney sticking up. Hotels, a foundry, quarries nearby, including the Elmont sandstone quarry and the famous Aberdeen granite quarry that turned out all the granite for the outside of the Colorado State Capitol building, and Gunnison also had a telephone system. However, by the end of 1883, the boom had busted. The collapse of silver prices began to close the mines. The smelters didn't work. Transportation charges were great. And Joe Cotter, popular Republican county treasurer, made off with $100,000 of the county's money and was never caught, putting the county in a deep financial hole. The Gunnison population, which had gotten to 6,000, began to level off. T.A. Rickard, a New York reporter who was here in 1883, declared, and I quote, "In spite of it all, Gunnison wears an aspect of resignation, as if to say, it is better to have boomed and busted than never to have boomed at all." The Gunnison Country now settled down to a normal existence, highlighted by what I call the 4 economic drivers, the 3 C's and the big T. The 3 C's were coal from Crested Butte, cattle, and later in 1911, the college. The big T was tourism, which involved great hunting and fishing and the fabulous scenery. And now we move out of Gunnison and move to towns around it. And important towns now sprang up throughout the Gunnison Country. To the west, about 10 miles, Iola began on the Gunnison River in 1896. And there you can see one of the hotels. Aside from being a ranching center, it soon became a tourist destination with 4 hotels for hunters and fishermen. Ranchers have told me that their grandfathers and fathers were forced to build cabins on the ranches to house friends who came out there to hunt and fish. And during tough times, they made a little money by these people coming in. Palmer Hoyt, the editor of the Denver Post, had a standing order at the telegrapher on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in Gunnison. When the willow flies hatched on the Gunnison River, he had to get an immediate message by telegraph, and Palmer Hoyt was on the next train out to go to Iola to fish. Iola was also the shipping point for the Iola Powderhorn Cattle Pool. 6 miles west, and also on the Gunnison River, was Savoia. Now there's a good shot of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad right after the Iola Powderhorn Pool had loaded cars with cattle, and they're being shipped out on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. And Iola is the place after the turn of the century where many sheep were killed by masked riders who were local ranchers to try and keep sheep out of the country. 6 miles to the west of Iola and also on the Gunnison River was the town of Savoia, the name meaning wild onions in Spanish. J.J. Carpenter from North Carolina started a ranch there right where Savoia Creek ran into the Gunnison River in 1882. Nell, go back to that previous photo. And there you can see the Sportsman's Lodge, 20 cabins right along the river, and the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad going right by it. Now, if you come to Gunnison today and go just north, you will see going the entrance into the Palisades, they got a building that says Savoia Apartments, and it's yellow. And the Savoia Apartments is the Sportsman's Lodge, which was moved there right when the Blue Mesa Reservoir began to fill up. So you're looking at it right now, and if you go north of Gunnison, right to the entrance of the Palisades, you'll see it again, the Savoia Apartments. Now we go to the next photograph. And there, one of the last runs is the Denver and Rio Grande near Savoia around 1952. And right after that, the tracks are going to be pulled out. The last town to the west was Sapinero, named for the Ute Indian sub-chief. It was at the entrance of the Black Canyon and 7 miles west from Savoia. And it was laid out as a Rio Grande stop, originally called Soap Creek in 1881. It had 2 hotels and a controlled entrance to the Black Canyon and 2 great mesas, the Blue and the Black. The little ranching community became famous because of the 4 bridges at Sapinero. Now hold on, Nell. I want you to look at that photograph. You're looking at the Rio Grande Railroad, and then that is the Sapinero School on the right. And now we can take a look at the 4 bridges at Sapinero. If Nell can post that up for you. That's the last, there we go. And that is a famous picture, hangs on Wall Street. The 4 bridges of Sapinero, all within 100 yards of each other. An automobile and a railroad bridge ran over the Lake Fork of the Gunnison River, and an auto bridge and a railroad bridge ran over the Gunnison River. One set of bridges led to Lake City, and the other one led to Montrose. And all 4 bridges, as I've mentioned, are within 100 yards of each other. Very unique. There's not another spot in the U.S. that had anything like that. And that's why it hangs in Wall Street today. The fate of Iola, Savoia, and Sapinero was sealed in the mid-1960s when the Blue Mesa Dam backed up the Blue Mesa Reservoir, the largest body of water in Colorado, and all 3 were covered up by the reservoir. To the east of Gunnison, another set of little towns grew up along the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. There's another photo of the Sapinero Saloon, kind of a staged photograph with a guy on horseback by the main door and a guy on the left pointing a pistol. To the east of Gunnison, another set of little towns grew up along the D&RG Railroad. Sargents on the base of Marshall Pass came into being in 1881 when the railroad came through. It was named for Postmaster Joe Sargents. Now, if we can go to that one, that's number 12, I think. There it is. There is a Denver and Rio Grande Railroad bucking snow in Sargents, January 20th in 1922. It was the end of track for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad as it came off Marshall Pass. The original name was Marshalltown, but it was soon named for the postmaster, Joe Sargents, who had a little ranch there. The end of track at Sargents was a boom town. 8 of the first 14 buildings were saloons. 6 helper engines operated out of there to pull heavily laden coal and ore trains over Marshall Pass. Double and triple headers pulling those cars over the pass. Sargents was also on a road that ran to White Pine and Tamichi to the north, and teams of horses pulled wagons loaded with silver ore from the mines to the railhead there. The Trinchera Lumber Company also employed 400 men near Sargents, and they used it as a loading area for timber. The old schoolhouse still stands in Sargents, and about 50 people live there year-round. Now, the next photograph that we're going to see is a contraption built by a man named Will Hicks. When I showed this photo to the stock growers about 20 years ago, I said, if anybody can tell me what this machine is, I'm going to buy them 2 6-packs of Heinekens. And I said, George Means can't answer, because George Means lived on the Upper Tamichi, and I knew that he knew. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a strawberry planter. At 8,477 feet, they raised commercial strawberries. And Will Hicks, who was the son, would take those strawberries by rail, take them into Gunnison on the stoplight corner, and he would sell out in 1 hour. Fresh strawberries, giving the lie that you can't have farming in the Gunnison Country, and that's going to be a later story, a later presentation. Doyleville, 17 miles from Gunnison and 15 from Sargent's is also on Tamichi Creek. And this one was started by Henry Doyle from my neck of the woods in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, who homesteaded there in 1876. It was a stage stop for Barlow and Sanderson stages, and then was a stop on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. Many great ranches existed around Doyleville. Nell, hit the next picture. I think that's the one on Doyle. There it is. And there is the Doyleville Post Office and Hotel in 1884. One of the people working on a Doyleville ranch in the 1880s was a man named William Bonney. He was lying low from the law, and he was better known as Billy the Kid. He only worked there a week. The next town east of Gunnison, about 12 miles east of Gunnison, is Parlin, also on Tamichi Creek, 12 miles from Gunnison. It began in 1877 when John Parlin started a dairy ranch. It was also home to two railroads, the Denver and Rio Grande, which came over Marshall Pass, and the South Park, which came from the Alpine Tunnel in Pitkin. William Jackson Palmer approached John Parlin as he built his railroad, and he said, "I'd like to buy a right-of-way, and I'd like to buy a place where I can put a depot and maybe some buildings." And John Parlin said, "I'm going to give that to you if you agree to allow the Rio Grande to stop for 5 minutes in Parlin so I can sell milk to the passengers." And that was the deal. Two of the guys working on a ranch between Parlin and Doyleville, they're working on the John Coates Ranch, were Frank and Jesse James. And Ike Thompson talked about this in a good article that I have. He saw these guys, recognized them from Missouri. They're on the run, they're hiding out. And immediately Frank James walked over to Ike Thompson. He said, "Ike, good to see you." He said, "The name is Brown around here, you understand?" And Ike Thompson said, "I understand all right." And after 2 months of working on the Coates Ranch, Mrs. Coates was a relative of the James brothers, they left. One of the other guys who was in this area was Wyatt Earp. And Wyatt Earp ran a Faro exchange right where Treads and Threads are on West Main today. And he was here with Morgan Earp hiding out from the gunfight of the OK Corral. And he left after about a month. 6 miles north of Gunnison, along the banks of the Gunnison River, was the Elmont Sandstone Quarry right on Rio Grande tracks. That quarry was used to provide the stone that was used in many upscale Gunnison homes in the 1880s. 4 miles north of the quarry and 10 miles north of Gunnison is a very unique little village called Elmont. This is the only town or village in Colorado that is named for a racehorse. Elmont came into being in 1879 because of its location where three rivers came together: the East, the Taylor, and the Gunnison, and also because of Sam Fisher. Fisher was a mining engineer from Massachusetts, and his wandering nature led him into the promising Gunnison Country in the spring of 1879, when he and his brother Horace both drove 4-horse team pulling a spring wagon into the Gunnison Country. Fisher, with hundreds and then thousands of people moving north to the Great Silver Camp, Fisher built a bridge over the Taylor River and charged $2 a team to cross and 25 cents for a man on horseback. He also built a toll road east to Spring Creek and another to Jack's Cabin 6 miles north. Now you're looking at what later on became known as Salisbury's Taylor River Resort. That's right where Three Rivers is today. The original name of the homestead that Fisher now took up was Fisher's, but in 1881 it changed to Elmont. Elmont had been the famous Hamiltonian stallion of the century in England. Fisher bought an offspring of the horse and named him Fairmont. However, everybody was more familiar with the great horse Almond, and the name Almond stuck. The Denver and Rio Grande came through Almond heading for Crested Butte in 1881, and that ended the toll roads and freighting for Fisher. In 1893, he sold out to Vernon Davis of Denver, who turned that homestead into a summer resort. Sam Fisher went to Placerville, and he went broke building hanging expensive gold flumes high above the San Miguel River. And you can still see some of them today. They've redone them. Elmont became very important because it was on the Rio Grande line. It was a center for ranchers of the area. It was a shipping point for lead, zinc, and silver that came out of the famous Doctor Mine up Spring Creek. And of course, it was a major tourist area. Elmont achieved national fame in July of 1940 when Republican presidential candidate Wendell Willkie, on vacation, came to Elmont to give the first speech in his race against Franklin Delano Roosevelt for president. He came during the annual fish fry, which had been going on since 1922. 10,000 people showed up. Traffic was backed up 7 miles on Highway 135 towards Gunnison, and the speech was covered by hundreds of newsmen from around the country. Others used the Denver and Rio Grande Telegraph Office to send news of the speech around the nation. The fish fry was the last ever held because of the great number of people, traffic problems, and the enormous amount of work putting it on. And there was Wendell Willkie talking to some of the 10,000 people. He was a good man. In any other time, he probably would have been a great president, but he was running against Franklin Roosevelt, and nobody had any luck against Roosevelt, who won 4 times presidential elections. When Wendell Willkie left Gunnison, he flew out on a United Airlines plane called the Mainliner. As the plane flew by the W on Tenderfoot Mountain, Wendell Willkie, WW, turned to the reporters on the plane and said, "Look, boys, even the hills speak forth." Alas, like every other candidate who ran against Franklin Roosevelt, Willkie would lose in the November election. About 10 miles north of Elmont is a town called Glacier, and there's a little red schoolhouse up there. And the only reason I mention Glacier is, which was a Rio Grande spur, which held 4 cars. This was very unique, and it was named Glacier because it is where the glaciers ended millions of years ago, hence the name Glacier. And finally, south of Gunnison by 30 miles is the beautiful Powderhorn Valley, which was settled in the late 1870s, originally called White Earth because of the white kale and clay found there, and it was soon renamed Powderhorn because there's a ridge between Savoya Creek and the Lake Fork of the Gunnison resembling one. Powderhorn was cattle country, with sheep and cows outnumbering people 3,000 to 100 or 30 to 1. Powderhorn also had hot springs that the Ute Indians used, and 20 of those springs were cold and sodic and were sold commercially. Before 1900, a guy named John Reese hauled the water to Gunnison in casks and bottled it there and sent it all over the nation. He said it was a delightful drink, and when to it is added lemon and sugar, it makes a lemonade fit for the gods. Reese sold that drink commercially for many years. Nell, you got to take that photo off just for a second. So here is the Gunnison Country, 17,000 people scattered over 3,300 square miles, 79% of the land federal. Here are some of the unique things that separate the Gunnison Country from almost every other area in Colorado. So take note. Number 1, it is a land of enormous water production. A lot of the water that goes into the Colorado River comes from one of the major tributaries, the Gunnison, which comes into the Colorado at the appropriately named town of Grand Junction. 2, it's one of the top cattle areas in the state. 3, it had the first college on the western slope of Colorado. Colorado State Normal College, 1911, then a 4-year school, Western State College, 1923. First chairlift for a ski area, Pioneer Ski Area, located 3 miles up Cement Creek, winter of 39 and 40. And now we go to that snowmobile, Nell. We're waiting for that snowmobile to come up. First snowmobile in history. And there it is, Stoplight Corner, 1923. It didn't work very well because that propeller didn't have enough power to pull forward if you had 6 inches of snow. And if you were on the flat and didn't have any snow, the damn thing went in every direction. So a great invention went a-glimmering. That's about the Stoplight Corner of Gunnison today. Next, the Gunnison Country is one of the most versatile mining areas in Colorado history. Gold and silver and uranium and granite and marble and coal. And above, Crested Butte on Mount Emmons, the 4th richest and largest deposit of molybdenum in the world at Mount Emmons. Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Lincoln Memorial came out of the great marble quarries at Marble. We'll be talking about Marble in a later episode. Highest railroad tunnel in the world, Alpine Tunnel, 11,523 feet. First major Bureau of Reclamation project in history, 6-mile-long Gunnison Tunnel, watering the Uncompahgre Valley. First railroad on the western slope, Rio Grande, Gunnison, 1881. First great hotel in western Colorado, one of the 7 great ones on the western slope, the La Vida. One of 4 national parks, the Black Canyon. 3 major dams on the Blue Mesa Reservoir area. Largest body of water in Colorado and the 2nd biggest tourist attraction. Highest paved road over the Continental Divide in the United States. Cottonwood Pass, 12,126 feet. One of the 2 top mountain biking areas in the world, along with Moab, Utah. 6 14,000-foot elk mountains in between Aspen and Crested Butte. And here's a little tip for any of you who haven't done it. From the West Maroon Trailhead to the top of West Maroon Pass at 12,400 feet, one of the great flower areas in the world. You walk through that area, it's almost like you're hand in hand with Julie Andrews. Land of Sunshine, we've already talked about that. And the Spanish flu, which made Gunnison and the Gunnison Country famous in 1918 and 19 because of that strict blockade that was put in. Anybody coming in was not allowed to leave. Anybody going out was not allowed to come back in. So Gunnison, famous in the nation for very few deaths during that Spanish flu of 1918 and 1919. And I will finish with the year before I got here. This is Labor Day weekend, 1961 in the Gunnison Country, long remembered. A terrific storm hit, trapping thousands of visitors. Snow was bumper deep in Taylor Canyon. Drifts were 3 feet deep at Tin Cup. The weight of the heavy snow broke telephone lines and electric lines, leaving the county without power. Visitors were caught without warm clothing, tire chains, or snow tires. Monarch Pass was closed, cars stuck all over the road. Chapito Hall was opened up at Western and 200 travelers were given emergency shelter. And you also could have Christmas Day in Gunnison County and play tennis. So, one of the great areas in the Mountain West you've just heard about. All hail the Gunnison Country. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take cameras and I'd like to see the chat box so I can see who's out there. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer.